We do have Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah on Zoom, and later we will also be speaking to Seydou Abudu. He's president of the Ghanaian community in Niger. He's been on the line with us. We have Smaila Idi Zanze, who is chairman Progressive Onion Sellers Association, also joining us. Kojo Nkrumah, thank you so very much for making the time to join us. Now, let me give you a sense of how some Ghanaians feel about Ghana's commitment in this process. And it appears Ghana is taking, a certain lead role, including hosting the defense chiefs in the last 2 days here in Accra. Alhaji Suleiman says, I urge all citizens of West Africa to rise and demonstrate against these clueless leaders who have plagued us with their incompetence. If they attempt to send troops to Niger, our generation is indeed suffering from leadership paralysis. Then Albert Senyo says, military action isn't the way to go. Diplomatic engagement will offer the opportunity to resolve military invasions over the last few years. Military invasions over the last few years haven't done any good. It's only worsened the plight of the very people we claimed to be helping. Mohammed Ibrahim says, I think what ECOWAS should do is to stop the Western countries from interfering in African issues. And let's work together as Africans. Osa Bonnie says that the force approach will worsen the situation. It demands a calm approach by meeting all the coup leaders for proper deliberation that could lead to a compromise. What if that is not working? Kwame Ochre says, since the junta refused to hand over back power to the democratically elected government and coups are becoming rampant in West Africa, Nigerian press, or you mean Nigerian president, is held, okay, the Nigerian president is held against his will, including the turmoil that will continue when military is in power. ECOWAS must act now. Good. Dennis Kwafi says this is geopolitics. Whether we join or not, we will still have an interest as to who we support. So I think the president has thought of it and think joining will help us. Nas Neti, they couldn't solve a problem between two clans for 27 years, but you want to go and solve the problem of another country in which majority of the people are not in support of the elected president anymore? Ansong John says, military strategy presupposes political end. All military problems are political, and all political problems are economic. He's quoting Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and says, fix the political ineptitude and economic incompetence first before going to Niger. ECOWAS. Owula Spee says, our soldiers have never fought any war in their lives. Are you sure about that? Except fight police officers and brutalize innocent Ashaman people. Warn the president not to use my tax to deploy our soldiers to this unwanted venture. Bar Real says, who exactly are they restoring the so-called democracy for? The people of Niger are fully in support of the military. Well, there are Nigerians in Ghana who have been telling you that they are not in support. They want President Bazoum back. These so-called leaders are nothing but puppets of the West. We'll explore that other angle and accusation that you have heard Samuel Okudzeto mention. Samuel Okudzeto mention. You've heard Professor Kwesi Ening also hint at. I'm not too sure if I recall exactly Festus Abuaji, making any reference to that, but I'm sure that Dr. Ken Ahosu also appeared to have hinted at that. Now, Laurie says corruption and mismanagement has led Niger into this mess. African states are shivering at the sight of military interventions. Who are shivering at the sight of military intervention should govern devoid of corruption and thievery. Our 60 billion Bank of Ghana saga is enough grounds to trigger us. We should just do the right thing. And a final one from Nana Opoku Ponsa. He says, as a Ghanaian, I am not in support of the decision by the government of Ghana to send our army to Niger. Well, you heard the defense minister. He says they are ready. Anytime the whistle is blown, they will go. The citizens of Niger are speaking to bad leadership and governance. Government of Ghana should focus on the mess in the country and pray same does not fail. We are not angry enough. So, Kojo, it doesn't appear from what we are picking from the streets, at least from what people are telling us on air, that they want our government, to commit to this. But we are actively in the center of it.
Morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this very privileged panel. I haven't seen many of them in a while. I think the last time I saw him was when he gave me a copy of his book on ECOWAS interventions or ECOMOG interventions in West Africa. So it's good to be part of this panel.
Right.
I think if you put a question to any rational person that should ECOWAS use diplomacy or force, I'll be surprised to hear any rational person say force. And I think the kind of responses that you are getting and which you are reading are because of how we have framed this conversation for our people. And in my submissions this morning, I will seek to highlight a few things that I think we should make dominant in our conversation. Now, let me start off by making 3 foundational comments, and I just have 5 points to make. The 3 foundational comments I'll make essentially are that it is appropriate that we are all concerned. We're all concerned about the kind of rhetoric that is coming out of ECOWAS and from citizens and every other place, because, instability is growing and can easily spread across the sub-region. Apart from that, there's also palpable evidence that geopolitics is playing a big role here. And, the West, be it Western Europe or Eastern Europe, is very interested in West Africa for their own economic interests. And now, even more than in times past, may I say, conditions are primed to have instability grow a bit further. So it is appropriate that we are all concerned about how this matter is resolved. Secondly, I think also respectfully, any conversation that appears to position this as a choice between diplomacy and force does not do full justice to what ECOWAS is confronted with, and I would explain that further. I think that if we want to help the conversation, we should posit the conversation in its full breadth. If we posit it in a manner that says, should we use diplomacy or force? 1, we will get a very clear answer that says diplomacy. And 2, that will not do full justice to the conversation here. And I know that's why, Dr. Kusini was commenting when I laughed earlier. Number 3 is that I think we need to be very, very, very careful to stick with what we know as fact and then put away conjecture and other things, especially as Sami Kujetua Blakwa mentioned. There's a lot of propaganda that is being churned out to help various interests. And if you're not careful, you will base arguments on the propaganda and other sentiments and not the fact. But let me speak to my major points that I want to make as we go about this conversation. First of all, I believe, and I share the view that all the concerns that have been raised by the distinguished guests that you have here are legitimate. And those concerns have to be responded to as we go along, except for about 2 or 3 that I quickly think it's important to correct. In Ghana here, at least, it is not fair to make comments that suggest that Parliament is being ignored. In fact, on the 21st of August, 2023, the Ministers of National Security and Foreign Affairs requested to brief the joint committees of Foreign Affairs and Defense and Interior on the development so far and what Ghana was considering. You notice that in my brother Sami's submissions, that came later. It was not front-loaded. The front-loaded submission suggested that Parliament was being ignored. But here in Ghana, we have briefed at our request, not at our invitation, at our request, the joint committees of Foreign Affairs and Defense and Interior. Again, the suggestion that Article 75 requires some prior parliamentary approval or ratification is incorrect. Article 75 is about treaties and agreements. It is not about contributing to a multilateral engagement, because when you have a multilateral engagement, as has happened in times past, and I can give you a whole retinue of times when Ghana has been involved in multilateral engagements, 2002 in Cote d'Ivoire, 2013 in Mali, 2016, 2017 in Gambia. If it is a multilateral engagement from a body that Ghana is part of, you do not require prior approval, but the decent thing to do, the important thing to do is to engage Parliament first, so that you do full disclosures to Parliament about why you are, a part of this enterprise, what the risks are, how you are mitigating them. And of course, if some financial commitment is required from the Treasury, you will need to get the kind of approval for it. So, as I've mentioned, I agree generally with all the sentiments that have been raised, but just to highlight these specific ones. Now, the concerns, as I mentioned, are very, very, very legitimate. Concerns like what Dr. Or what Colonel Festus Obwaji raised, that are the hands of all ECOWAS countries totally clean as they purport to lecture or intervene in this matter? Or how does ECOWAS answer the questions of financing or funding some parts of this, even as you go along? Questions about how ready are we and whether or not we'll be doing, quote unquote, the dirty job of, Western masters. All of these are legitimate concerns that ECOWAS heads of state and ECOWAS countries owe answers to their populations about if and when we get there. But there is a fact that we are not including in our conversation. And I think that is what is swaying the whole conversation to that side. In fact, if you have, and I know you have, if you have followed, ECOWAS has not said that it is confronted with a choice between diplomacy and military intervention. I haven't heard ECOWAS say that. The two communiques issued by ECOWAS front-load diplomacy. In fact, in the insert of Commissioner Musa that you played, if you listen to what he says, and he's there, he can tell me if I'm misinterpreting him or not. His comments are that when you talk about the item 2, which is a possible use of force, they have answered the questions now. The chiefs of defense staff don't need to meet to examine the modus operandi or the details about the use of force if it comes to that point. They don't intend to meet again on it. They have clarity on when that can be triggered, that is D-Day, if need be. They have clarity on what resources, what they need to use if they have to do that. So the military guys have answered their question, but ECOWAS has not said that it does not have interest in diplomacy. In fact, since this matter happened, the brief I have is that there have been about 5 different diplomatic missions that have moved in. The first was President Talon of Benin, who went in to engage the military right on the onset with the approval of the head of the authority of heads of state. And then you had, I think, on the 30th of July, the Chadian president, Idriss Deby, who also went in with the concurrence of ECOWAS to do the second attempt at diplomacy. The third, if my brief is correct, was on the 2nd of August, the delegation led by the Nigerian head of state, the former head of state, Abubakar Salami, and then the Sultan of Sokoto. That was the delegation that initially they said they were not going to meet, and then subsequently they sent what we understand a very low-ranking officer to go and hear from them. Then on the 9th of August, the Emir of Kano and ex-governor of the central bank, Lamido Sanusi, also then went in with the concurrence of ECOWAS leadership, I am told, to try another diplomatic engagement. Before the 12th of August diplomatic, or can I say move by the Muslim clerics, Babalao, and the rest, where some apologies came in. And from the brief that the government of Ghana has, ECOWAS is not closed to diplomatic interventions. But Samson, the reality is that, and I think as has been rightly mentioned, ECOWAS has a lot of work to do, first in terms of its own credentials and image on how it has handled things in times past. True. But one of the lessons that I think ECOWAS has to be humble enough and frontal enough to admit is that the option of naked diplomacy or diplomacy only has not borne the kind of results that we desire. And again, I make the point that the questions about whether everybody's hands are clean, the questions about, what will it cost, they're all legitimate. But they do not take away the fact that ECOWAS has lessons to learn from attempting to use naked diplomacy. And it is in that context that ECOWAS said, let's go ahead with diplomacy. But while we are doing that, let the standby force begin to mobilize. Let there be clarity that despite all the questions they may be within, first of all, the ECOWAS framework, secondly, about the potential for this particular mission, let there be clarity that diplomacy has to succeed. And that if diplomacy does not succeed within a certain time frame, then the use or the possible use of force is not off the table. Samson, the fourth item that I want to speak to is that it is important for us, all of us as commentators, to be clear, and I think it has started already in this conversation, that we support democracy. All this sort of insecurity and arbitrary acts across are not things that we support. And therefore, we want to encourage the military junta to see reason on a reasonable diplomatic arrangement with ECOWAS so that ECOWAS will not have to resort to a military intervention. And the risk is this. If the conversation is lopsided towards the risk, we cannot, we should not, what if, why if, we actually undermine the strength of ECOWAS in this entire enterprise. All of those questions are legitimate. They are legitimate risks. They are legitimate questions. But I think that we need to front load the conversation with a call on the military junta, all forces of democracy, with a call on the military junta that it is in our best interest to agree on a democratic, on a diplomatic resolution to this matter, so that we don't have to get to a point where ECOWAS has to bring in military intervention and answer all the military questions. I'll give you, just a bit of data in my final point. It is theoretically and sometimes sentimentally appropriate to raise the question of what causes military coups in various parts of the world, including West Africa. But I think if you look specifically at what has happened in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they were quite clear on why they did it. And in all of those instances, with the greatest of respect, it was not necessarily about what you call bad governance or unconstitutional rule. In fact, in Burkina, the issue was about security, jihadist elements, and terrorism. And the argument was that the civilian authorities were not being robust enough in dealing with it. And therefore, if the military operatives took over, they could do a better job. We have to ask ourselves a question and look at the hard data. Has the military takeover stabilized, reduced, or rather worsened the jihadist or Islamic incidents there, which was the reason that they gave for it? In Mali, we had the reasons that were given. Those reasons, again, security in nature. In fact, in Niger, and with the greatest of respect, if you go back to the announcement that was given by the persons who executed this coup in Niger, there was not, and there has not been, by the official spokespersons of this enterprise, any French claims in this. And that's why I say we have to distinguish between what we know as a fact and the commentary and things that we are seeing around social media. In fact, their premise was two. They talked about jihadism, terrorism, and then what they called economic mismanagement. Across these places, has jihadism, terrorism stabilized, gone down, or worsened? In fact, in Burkina Faso, if you look at the data now, it is worsening. If you look at
even in Niger, there has been an uptick.
Absolutely. If you look at the data from the African Center for Strategic Studies, the data is quite clear that in Mali, the insecurity, terrorist attacks, human rights abuses is actually worsening. And like you rightly mentioned, in Niger, in the last, I think, 1.5 weeks, the data suggests about 35 people have been killed, 17 in one recent attack. So I make the point that and I'll explain why, while theoretically and even sentimentally, it makes sense to have a conversation about the causes and the triggers. If you add that to the specific instances of Burkina, Mali, Niger that we are discussing, what you are doing ends up undermining a certain legitimate conversation, which is that, and I will not say constitutionally, because people can meddle with constitutions and play games, democratically elected governments being overthrown by military adventurists is something that collectively, I think we collectively oppose it. Collectively, we must speak against it. And in this specific case, it has not led to what they claimed it was going to lead to. So to end my submissions, yes, there are legitimate concerns. Ken Officer Zawaji raises them, Kwesiening raises them, Sami raises them. But I think that the front loading of our commentary should be to encourage the military junta not to play the games that Mali and Burkina have been playing under the guise of diplomacy, but to come to the table with a clear, diplomatic, acceptable layout that resolves this matter as quickly as possible.
All right.
My worry is that when we lopside our conversation towards the risks which are legitimate, the challenges which are legitimate, we end up emboldening them and we don't get a strong position enough. Those will be my opening submissions.
All right. Thank you very much. And as you admit, I believe that our panel of experts have been very thorough and their expertise is duly appreciated, and that the discussion is not necessarily lopsided, even though you have a wish and prayer that there will be a certain framing as to what comes first, second, and last. But I think that we can grant them from their backgrounds and wealth of experience what they believe is the best approach. Now, let me come to you now, and thank you once again for your patience, Abdul Fattah Musa, who until last July was the director of the West Africa and Sahel at the United Nations headquarters in New York. You heard Dr. Colonel Festus Abuaji say, number one, there is no just cause for your threats, for what you want to do. And he outlined the reasons using facts, if you like, sacred facts, not propaganda. You heard Professor Enin say that he repeated what he has told us here the last time I engaged him on the show, that you will not dare do what you are claiming you will do. And when Kojo says some of these may actually not be as helpful, I appreciate where he's coming from, because we should be discouraging the junta rather than statement that may suggest that or embolden them. I've come from an international lawyers conference where we all said we don't want these things to happen. So we want to urge them to restore democracy. But we're all as lawyers also concerned that some are abusing the democracy when you give it to them. And all the other things that you have heard said. So, first of all, why do you come to this decision when you have not come to a point where you can conclusively say that diplomacy will not work? Because you admit that recently they appear to be open to having discussions.
Thank you very, very much for having me once more. And I am really between the rock and the hard place here, right? Yeah, because everybody on the show, one way or the other, we are very connected.
Yeah.
Honorable Ablakwa here, Professor Kwesieni is a very good friend. We've known each other for a century, maybe. And Colonel Abwaje, we've worked a lot. And I'm happy that Honorable Kojo Opon Nkrumah for coming to my aid in certain aspects. So at least I have an ally.
Yeah. And he's not alone. There are other people
Exactly.
who are sharing commentary with me
Yes.
about the fact that your last communique, emphasized the primacy of peaceful resolution.
Yeah.
Except that the forceful resolution will be the last resort.
The last resort.
Yeah. And you have many very good friends sending me messages and sending their goodwill messages to you.
Okay, no.
You know George Bernard Shaw?
Oh, of course.
He also says, I should say hi to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. And on the other hand, Honorable Ablakwa is telling me that Kwesi Pratt says he will pond me. For a position.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So, okay. Look, I just want to probably have a structured intervention somehow, which would also take into account some of the concerns that have been raised.
All right.
The first and foremost is the causal factors of what is happening in the country. And I think Honorable Nkrumah has already shed light on some of them. That since about 2019, 2020, we know the havoc that COVID wreaked on the global economy. I was in the US. In fact, all the shops were rationing toilet paper at one point. I'm just giving you one small one. 2 weeks ago, I was in the UK. Some of the shelves in the shops were empty. Gas prices had shot up manifold, in the country. And you can cite examples. So if these, so-called most developed countries are facing the crunch, then you can think of Africa, with our weak infrastructure, weak, potential.
Because of our bad governance over the decades.
And if, because of these challenges, the military has to take over power, then the whole world will be under military rule. Okay, with the Ukraine crisis and its impact, particularly in the Sahel and other places, is going to be even worse. So I admit that there is governance deficit, okay, all across, our countries, and there is democracy deficit also. People should understand that the democracy, liberal democracy that we know it today, is barely 30 years in West Africa. In the US, where democracy has been there for centuries and other things, Trump still not accepting the outcome of the last results. And there were, foreign interference in the election that caused Hillary Clinton to lose the elections. That's also the external influence. In a country like the US, so I just want to talk about that. But when you come to that, that coup zone, in our country, it starts from the western tip of the, Atlantic Ocean, Gulf of Guinea, Senegal, all the way to the Red Sea. There is a belt that straddles the Sahara and then the tropical Africa, the south, the coastal countries and all that. And all of them are impacted from Senegal to Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Sudan. All of them. Okay. So it is not just the Francophone. Sudan is not a Francophone country, for example. And we have to understand one thing. Mali has been the bad boy in the politics of France. Guinea. Guinea was the first to say we are not going to be part of Francophrique by declaring independence in 1958. It was Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, who bailed Guinea out when the French were even removing nails from doors to make sure that they would punish Secretariat and his country for disobeying them. Up till today, Guinea does not use the franc CFA. They use their own money. Okay, so just context. So the thing is that what is the commonality of the threats in that place? You can talk about governance deficit. It is jihadism. It is terrorism, which is actually afflicting these countries. And as Honorable Nkrumah said, the number one reason given for the coups in Mali, in Burkina Faso, and now in Niger is insecurity. The others are the...
Plus mismanagement.
Yes.
Corruption.
Yeah, mismanagement. Yeah. No, they were listing all these characteristics. Burkina Faso's election that retained Kabore for a second term was adjudged by everybody as the freest in the continent. In fact, all the processes leading to that election were consensually agreed among all the political parties. So you cannot say, that the Kabore was instrumentalizing anybody so that he will remain in power. All of them accepted, and all the opposition parties accepted. When Kabore was leaving office, about 35% of the territory was under jihadist occupation. That is one thing we need to know. There were 700,000 refugees, internally displaced people in Burkina Faso. There have been 2 coups since. And what's the situation? Today, 70% of Burkina Faso is outside state control. 2 million internally displaced people from 700,000. 2 million. And you can see that for Mali, you can see that for Niger, where we just recorded an uptick in terrorist attacks in the country, which undermines the fact that the civilians were worse.
You actually issued a statement to condemn that.
We issued a statement to condemn the terrorist attack in okay. So for me, that is the issue, right? And ECOWAS is a rules-based organization, right? At least imperfect, but we have rules. In fact, ECOWAS protocols set the basis for even AU protocols. The charters and other things by AU, they all borrowed from ECOWAS. ECOWAS was a pace setter. 3 years ago, all the 15 member states in ECOWAS were under democratic rule. Elected president. And then within 3 years, like you said, there have been 7 coups. ECOWAS made mistakes, and I must admit it, right? That the tough measures that we adopt when there is a military coup pales in comparison with our very weak attitude towards elected presidents who weaponize the judiciary, instrumentalize the military, just for the purpose, of changing their constitutions and staying on in power. The situation in Guinea was very clear. You may excuse what was happening there with the third term of Ouattara, because he actually had a candidate who died on the eve of the elections and things like that. And his argument was that there was no time to replace him before the elections and all that. But that is beside the point. We made mistakes before. Does it mean that we must accept wrongdoing because there were faults before? there is a new dynamic. ECOWAS today is under a new administration at the commission level and at the level of the chairmanship of the ECOWAS authority. And everybody knows the democratic credentials of Bola Tinubu. He tasted prison for his fight against military dictatorships in his country. You know, just like I must say, also Ghana, President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo was one of the key pillars of the Kumepreko demonstrations and other things in Ghana that eventually led to the restoration of constitutional order in Ghana. So the decision that have been made is that this coup is one coup too many. We must draw the line in the sand. And that is with regard to, so that is the context that we have. But Colonel Abuaje is, from the military background. I'm not going to challenge him on the military front at all, because I don't think maybe I'll be no match, for him. But on the protocols, I think he's getting, a few things mixed up. That is very important to clarify. ECOWAS array of tools, in conflict resolution, is not necessarily sequential. It's not necessarily sequential, that you go from here and then you go there and then you go there. No, it depends upon the circumstance. They could be sequential, they can be a combination. And also saying, that the sanctions regime does not envisage this. And I mean, he corrected himself somehow by saying all other means. And I want to remind viewers that there is a supplementary act of ECOWAS of 2012 that expanded on the sanctions regime, including all the sanctions that are being imposed on Niger today. And they happened when Sanogo, overthrew the democratically elected government, Ibeka, in 2012. In 2012.
I referred to that in my very first question to Colonel Abuaje on this show.
Very good.
But Professor Enin is asking the question. This will not be the end. Niger will not be the end. Will this approach be the approach to the next?
So that is why I'm telling you that, look, we applied those severe and widespread sanctions against Sanogo's regime. Within 3 days, they relented. They relented. And a civilian transitional president was elected. I don't think it was the perfect. It ended up in a whole lot of tensions there, about that. But at least those sanctions worked. And that is why ECOWAS did not move to the next step, right? But it has been a bit inconsistent since then. And that's what I am admitting. So now we see...
Professor Enin referred to your sanctions and what you have now been told by Martin Griffiths, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordination at the UN. He wrote to you and said that the unintended adverse impact of some of your sanctions, and he gives a list of how the impact is very terrible and you need to do something about. And he ended by saying that he's looking forward to working with you to ensure that the population of Niger who has been directly affected by the crisis can receive the necessary humanitarian assistance.
Oh, yes. In the military planning, that have been taking place, the unintended consequences, the collateral, impact of any intervention were all taken into account, right, in it, including collaboration with UN humanitarian agencies. These were all taken into account. So I think his question is talking about the sanctions now. We've been working with his office, Griffith, actually to open up before now humanitarian corridors in Burkina, in Mali, and other places. So it is not anything new. We've been working on it. But if they tell you about the dire humanitarian consequences in Burkina Faso in particular today, I mean, what is happening in Niger pales into comparison. What have the humanitarian agencies done? Because the situation is under the control of terrorists, right? If you go 15 kilometers outside Ouaga or outside Bobo Dioulasso, which is the second city, it is no-go area, controlled by jihadists. Another thing, how are you going to enter there with humanitarian, support? And today, terrorists are increasing their attacks in Niger. So even if you have humanitarian support that you are going to give them, how are you going to reach those who need the support?
So you are seeking to underscore the justness of the course or the approach.
Yes, this is what, once again, we are saying. People are saying we are going to war with Niger, and they are opposed to it. Let me clarify. We are not going to war. In the whole planning of this intervention, the word war never features even once. But as Colonel Abuaje will himself admit, the fact that we are preparing does not mean we are going to war. Military preparations take time. It doesn't mean that it is imminent. Okay, we said we have an array of tools. In Nigeria, people are saying, oh, this is a war between Nigeria and Niger, brother countries. In fact, the two were actually one entity before the French and the British decided to carve up Africa. The same thing like the Gambia and Senegal, today. And the same thing like even Transvolta, Togoland. The same thing in Cameroon and other, which happened. It is those were some of the downside of the arbitrariness of colonial, carve up of the African, continent. So the people are the same, there. So you can see, you can feel the tension there. But in Nigeria, President Tinubu never went to Senate to request any authorization, never.
Yeah, but Okujeto was clear about that.
He informed them about decisions of ECOWAS. And then they, on their own, said that they did not actually rule out the military option. They said they want to engage President Tinubu on the peaceful, for the resolution of the crisis in a peaceful way. So, going to my point, we are not at war with Niger. The whole concept of operation, which is being prepared, it is based on targeted surgical operations in that place. We are at war with the Junta.
That is all things being equal, but this is not the situation.
Yeah, okay.
You are planning a surgical operation
precisely.
To go in and remove the Junta.
But things could change. That is in the military parlance.
Exactly.
Okay, so that is why we
and
are
already,
also,
as we mentioned, there is some response to what you did in Accra yesterday.
Yeah, we are taking into account the possible fallout when we get there. We also have our intelligence. When people are saying about the popularity of the regime and other thing, listen, there are foreign powers in West Africa that are cultivating bot farms with artificial comments on social media and other things, whipping up a certain narrative.
But we saw on television the people pouring out in their numbers.
Yeah, no, precisely. You can rent a crowd. Okay, those people, many of them rather spontaneous. Many of them were at the stadium, gathered at the stadium to meet emissaries who they considered favorable to the Junta. This is what, you have to get the nuance. And then on social media, they are showing the burning of the ruling party's headquarters at the Nigerian embassy. In that country. And there are, tailors and others in the country that are sewing Russian flags and distributing them. All this funded. We have that information. Second, in that country, why did the CNSP dismiss the commander of the gendarmerie?
CNSP is the junta?
Yes, the CNSP is the junta. They dismissed the commander of the National Guard, Guard National, which two institutions, forces, wanted to organize a counter coup against those people holding President Bazoum hostage. And then there was a lot. Later on, things will come out, and then you will see. They were dismissed, and their number twos were co-opted into the junta. Okay, and now we have Risa Agbula, who was a Tuareg rebel leader during the Tuareg Wars. This country, Niger, is the one that managed diversity better than any of the countries in the Central Sahel. In fact, they had stopped the Tuareg rebellion. The Tuaregs had been incorporated. Today, this Agbula is saying that, okay, so if you don't want the minority, because the country is overwhelmingly Hausa, Kanuri, and Jerma, which they call in Ghana here Zamrama. Okay, those are the elites over there. The Arabs constitute just about 0.4% of the population. And the Tuareg also a minority. They say, oh, is that it? So they have created what they call the National Council for Resistance Council for the Republic. So internally, there are fissures. And you yourself just said about demonstrations in Accra here. We've seen some...
So this particular last point you make...
Yes.
...makes it imperative, the intervention you seek to make.
Yeah,
your intervention...
Yes.
...will rather, that is if diplomacy fails, your intervention will rather forestall what might become...
What might be a worse situation in the country.
Okay.
And what we are saying is, we are not at war with Niger. We are at war with the Junta, with the CNSP. And that is the target of the operations. Yeah, so there should be a difference here. There's a nuance, in it. Having said that, and I think my brother Opon Krumah also stressed that point. ECOWAS has never removed it made the military intervention its preferred option. At any particular moment, we have mentioned that it is the least preferred option. And I want to go diplomacy, and then the midway point is also coercive diplomacy through the sanctions. And if everything fails, okay, and why did ECOWAS get to that point? These people were thumping their noses at the heads of state, of the community. When General Abdul Salami, who worked a lot in Niger, in 2009, I was with him at that time to help restore constitutional order after this
former president of Nigeria
constitutional coup by Tanja. Yeah, he was sent there, and he and then Emir of Sokoto, they were confined to the airport. Later on, myself as part of a mission, ECOWAS, AU, UN, were on the way to the airport to go there, still on the diplomatic path. Then they sent us a message that they were not ready to receive us.
But you should not feel aggrieved and react in equal measure, because you are the one, seeking to be diplomatic, to secure a diplomatic solution.
Precisely, but that is exactly what we are doing. But listen to me. The moment after
but now you are threatening them
after the 10th
in
August,
very clear terms that you will strike.
Yes, after the 10th August meeting, that was when they sent information through back channels to Sanusi, who is the Emir of Kano, former one. Yeah, that they were ready to talk without directly coming to us. So pressure worked. And then when this meeting of the Committee of Chiefs of Defense Staff was postponed, the information we got was that Asante Hene had told the president that Ghana should not host the meeting, so it had been cancelled. That was what was on the social media. Instead of giving the facts.
That seemed to have emboldened them a bit.
Emboldened them a bit because Ghana was not going to take part, and then, whatnot. And then when they saw that we were coming here Thursday and Friday to hold this second meeting, then that the new Prime Minister, Zain, now called and said they were ready to receive the delegation.
Okay.
Yes, and then some people close to them have been calling me while here. So if you had just sat down and said, okay, we are there, you are knocking on the door and they are not responding, and you are sitting down, what else do you do as
we'll return to
as
the
an
question.
organization?
The question about because I'm getting from what you're just saying, the last few seconds, that the risk that people talk about to Ghana is real because of the developments that you are mentioning.
Yes.
That there was actually the attempt that Ghana should not host. Why should Ghana not host this meeting? Because of the risk. And Ghana has gone ahead to host, and there is some fear, and they are beginning, to sort of give in. Now, the question that is being asked is, how is this being funded? Of course, we have been told about how the Nigerian senators came together and said we don't want this because of the direct impact. Earlier I said about 6 of the states, but I think it's about 7. Sokoto, Kebbi, Katsina, Zamfara, Jigawa, Yobe, and Borno
That's
states.
the northern senators.
Yes.
Those bordering Niger. Yes.
Right. Who is funding this?
Okay.
The Nigerians say, in any case, we are poor. We don't have money. People are hungry. So Ghana, we're broke.
So
who is funding this?
Yeah. Thank you. Let me just, a way of answering your question. And I think all these issues were raised by Colonel Abuaje, and it was also raised by Honorable Ablakwa, here. That, do you know that ECOWAS...
Dr. Ken Ahosu also raised it.
Also raised it. Ahosu, yeah, sorry.
Right.
In fact, he's someone I met, I miss. Ahosu, I hope you forgive me for not acknowledging that. Ghana adopted its plan of action for the eradication of terrorism in 2019, with an annual budget of, 2.4 billion, dollars. And we said we're going to fund it. It was, first they said voluntary contribution. Of course, people have mentioned Nigeria, 25 million, Ghana, 5 million, and other. There is a whole lot of stories behind that. When the new administration came, that is what I'm telling you. Since 2019, ECOWAS has not attempted even to activate the kinetic force to fight terrorism. This new administration said, never. What do you say, eradication of terrorism, and you are saying that? So, we were planning, to activate the standby force to go and help countries like Burkina Faso. And in cooperation, I visited here, went to the field, headquarters of the Accra Initiative in Tamale, with the Bendere and then others. See how we could collaborate, to make sure we take on the terrorists over there. So that was on course. And ministers of finance were due to meet with the ministers of defense based on what we had prepared. And this is what I'm going to tell you about when people are saying that we are going to fall into the hands of external forces. I just say the heads of state says this must be funded on a compulsory, mandatory basis by member states. ECOWAS is the organization in Africa that almost 80% funds its own activities from the community levy. The AU is less than about 30%. Okay, so ECOWAS is very unique, in that area. They said, we are going to fund it if it means increasing even the community levy by a fraction of a percentage. To raise that money, we are going to do it. That was on course. We had also given a lot of money from the ECOWAS community budget to these countries under terrorist, these attacks, for equipment and others. That is not broadcast and things like that. Then this coup came and diverted everything. Okay, so how do we get back to fighting the immediate cause of all this insecurity in the region, which is the cascading terrorism, which is impacting, northern Ghana, the number of refugees and others. So what I will tell you is that During the meeting yesterday and the day before yesterday, all member states, and I heard Colonel Abuaji say Togo was not going. Togo made concrete pledges yesterday. Concrete pledges. Yes, for the force. All the countries, those who have promised battalions and others, I can't give you the figures for security reasons, but all of them made very concrete contributions, which we are taking to the heads of state now.
The armed forces personnel strength for the ECOWAS, as we know, is supposed to be, is it 489,000 strong, right? And as Sami hinted us, we understand that what you need for what you are going to do should be at least 1,000.
You said 50,000.
150 or 50,000? 50,000.
That is speculation.
That's speculation?
That's speculation.
And even that you can't get.
We have our concrete figure, but I won't disclose it. It is far, far, far less than what is being told. Look, what Niger, force strength is about 13,000. 13,000. The whole force strength of Niger. We don't need up to 50,000, troops to go and confront 13,000, which are not even a monolith in the country in the first place. So all these pledges were made. And I want also to assure Colonel Abuaji that the force commander has been designated. The deputy force commander has been designated. And ECOWAS is supposed to now develop the civilian administration, to cover it, because the civilian, aspect of the force. All these cannot be announced until the heads of state and government give their seal of approval.
Okay.
So
when you do, and as you said, this defense chiefs will not meet again unless in the course.
Yes.
So how do you intend to engage the local communities in Niger to ensure that the deployment is well received? Because you say that you are not going for Nigerians, you are going for the junta.
Yes.
How are you going to do that?
Very good. I activated at the ECOWAS Commission, just, when all this occurred, the crisis response mechanism. One of the key axes of that is strategic communication, which is already being worked out. Yesterday, I met a group of media experts in Ghana, here, to see how we could benefit from them. Like we said, in Nigeria, we are doing the same. So there is a crisis communication that is being developed at the headquarters level and within the planning of the military. There is a PsyCop. If you are Colonel Abuaji, he will tell you about that. It is about psychological operations. When you are confronted with such a situation, we have taken all those elements on board, as I speak to you. When it comes to military planning and other things, it is about winning.
You did indicate that you know for a fact that there's going to be the spillover effects. Yeah. Because even though you intend to do a surgical operation, that is if it gets there.
Yes.
Because the primacy is diplomacy. How do you intend to mitigate the risk that come as a result of the spillover? And I'm asking this because we ought to be sure when, for example, our foreign mission will begin to say Ghanaians or whoever it is start moving, or we start what do you call it? Not a deployment. How do you repatriate our citizens and so on?
From there, yes. You see, so this is the classical civil war or natural calamity, whatnot. People have been trying to get their citizens out of places like Sudan over the war. This is it's very dissimilar, to those situations that you are talking about.
Countries like the US and others had asked their citizens to look for private transportation means to get out.
Before the elections in Nigeria, the Americans and the British were evacuating their citizens. It is their modus operandi everywhere, even Liberia.
So there will not be a need for this?
No. Liberia, which was their colony, when Charles Taylor invaded, the first thing they did, that was where they had all their gadgets for West Africa. What they did was evacuate everybody and leave ECOWAS to carry the hot potato. So this is the modus operandi of these powers. And that's why I say that we don't rely on any of them.
Yeah, so that's back to my questioning.
Yeah,
you are
to your
saying
question,
that if it comes to this,
yes,
and you activate the standby force,
yes,
there will not be the need for evacuation of foreign nationals.
no, we have activated the force. It's not activating them. We've activated it when it comes to deployment. Okay, so the second phase is the deployment, which the timing and everything. But there are caveats, you know, to the D-Day that we are talking about. So the D-Day can shift depending upon the progress on the mediation front, you know, right? But the thing is that we must be ready. For in any situation like that, it is the ability to project force even without using it. You know, that is one of the key elements of, you know, this power diplomacy that we have. And this is what we are doing. And we have indicated in our planning what will be done when there is, a humanitarian crisis, right, in the region, together with the international humanitarian agencies, coordinating, you know, with that, first and foremost, the UN. Everything is in the planning. And of course, I cannot predict what exactly is going to happen. There is that possibility, and we have made contingency plans for that.
All right.
So this is what, you know, what I will say with regard to that.
I'm coming. I need to take a quick break, and when we return, we have some 30 minutes, and I will have my guest give us not more than 2 minutes of comment or statement. However, I will speak to a Ghanaian in Niger to give us some idea and how they're feeling and what the temperature or the tempo in the country is. We will be right back. We've just been speaking to Abdel Fattah. Abdel Fattah Musa, who until last July was a director of West Africa and the Sahel at the United Nations headquarters in New York. He is a commissioner in the ECOWAS. We'll be right back.
All member states of ECOWAS present here today have all committed elements. They have committed their own equipment. They have committed their own resources to undertake this mission. So I tell you, we are ready to go anytime the order is given. The D-Day is also decided, which we are not going to disclose. There will be no more meetings of the chiefs of defense staff. If there will be, it will be probably in the course of the operation if there is the need to adjust the operation. This is the second extraordinary meeting and the final meeting before deployment.
Right. And that's Ambassador Dr. Abdel Fattah Musa, Commissioner, Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the ECOWAS. Earlier you heard us speak to Kojo Opon Nkrumah, MP of Fwasia Yerebi and Minister for Information. Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa is also here in the studio, MP North Tongue and Ranking Member, Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament. Colonel Festus B. Abuaje, retired. He is author, conflict and security analyst, consultant on UN and AU joint planning for AU peace support operations, UNDP consultant on disarmament, South Sudan. He does other things. Professor Kwesi Enin, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research, Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Dr. Ken Ahosu, Senior Research Fellow, Head of Peace and Security Studies and Head of PhD Programs at Lesia University of Ghana. Joining us for a very quick, in 2 minutes, two gentlemen who are in Niger speak to us in the next just about 4 minutes, and then I'll get my guests 2 minutes each and their concluding comments as to what the next steps ought to be in the Niger situation. Seydou Abudu is president, the Ghanaian community in Niger. Seydou, thank you so very much. You have been very patient with us. you join us from the very start, and you get to speak to us in just about 2 minutes.
Okay.
What's the sense of acceptance or opposition to what ECOWAS is planning in Niger, for Niger?
Okay, thank you very much. Greeting to your viewers. Right now, what I can say is what ECOWAS is planning to do in Niger, if it's true that it comes on, is going to affect the Ghanaians and the foreigners in this country. It's not going to be easy for us because right now, many people are trying to attack the foreigners if the ECOWAS make any move to attack Niger.
How do you know that?
According to the sources, you know, I don't want to comment on the political side because as a Ghanaian president, Ghana community president in Niger, our focus is to maintain how we can protect the Ghanaians in this country. But as you all know, 1 + 1 is 2. That one, no one is going to tell you. And one thing is, which is worrying, and is right now all the borders has been closed, and they are declaring Niger as no plane, and
No fly zone.
what we are in right now.
Are you in any way in touch with the Ghanaian authorities, the mission, the foreign affairs of Ghana, and are you being taken through any sort of preparations so that in case there is any difficulty, there will be some way out for you?
Yeah, since the coup d'etat, we are always have some engagement with the Ghana embassy, the mission here. Time to time, we are having some meeting with them to see how much we can protect the Ghanaians. But right now, our difficulty is when we heard that ECOWAS is going to use force, all the borders has already been closed. So right now, even if there's any evacuation, how the leaders are going to evacuate the foreigners in this country? That is going to be difficult. Right now that I'm speaking, the French people has already evacuated all their nationals here. So it has remained only the foreigners, the West Africa countries. So once the borders are closed, the question that we are asking right now is if there's any evacuation. I don't think it will be possible for us to evacuate because all the borders has been closed. And if ECOWAS is going to use force, that one is another matter because we, the foreigners, is going to affect us a lot.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me speak to Ibrahima Bobakar Salo. He is an analyst and media consultant. Thank you for joining us from Niger. Because you are a media person and you are within this country, what's the sense of acceptance again or opposition to what ECOWAS is seeking to do?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give my point of view. But I would like to be fair with my friend Abdou in Niger. I think Nigerian people are really appreciating how ECOWAS populations are supporting Niger against the ECOWAS project to intervene in Niger. I think there is a big difference between ECOWAS populations in Niger and maybe France population. And even for France, I saw many different French people at different rally organized in Niger. So I don't think if foreigners are really, there is a problem with foreigners in Niger, but I can understand Seydou when he said what he just said.
Yeah.
So about the ECOWAS decision to intervene in Niger, I think there is a fact that it's important to precise because this is really and the very, very, very first time we see this kind of mobilization, this kind of popular mobilization. People coming from everywhere, showing support to the state, showing support to the nation, showing support to Niger because I think there's a difference between maybe Junta and Niger. The ECOWAS speech is mobilizing people. Because people don't want Niger to be attacked by others. When Musa tried to make a difference or nuance, what he called nuance between a chirurgical intervention and a war, I don't think if Nigerians are perceiving it like that, and I don't think if it is like that. For people, it is just, okay, there was a coup in Mali, there was a coup in Burkina, but it's because the ECOWAS doesn't respect Niger that ECOWAS decided to intervene in Niger. And also it's because France has his basis in Niger that ECOWAS decided. People are not really now able to understand all what Musa is trying to understand to Niger. I think there is nothing more mobilizing people than this way and this project to intervene in Niger. And on the other hand, I think this for people is not really the solution, because when you say to militaries, their job is to make war, their job is to defend the country. When you decide to dissuade them, when you decide to attack them, it is not for them a reason to give up. It's, on contrary, a reason to be really, really engaged and committed to defend. So this is not, it's really perceived by Nigerian, by the militaries, and by others analysts as a war. There is no way for ECOWAS to intervene in Niger without crisis in Niger. There is no difference between Niger militaries and also Niger population. When Niger is 1,200,000 kilometers superficie. So intervening in Niger, how the ECOWAS can come to Niamey, and that's why people think it's really France who is behind this, because France is in Niamey with his basis. So it's very easy for France to intervene and open doors.
So I get a sense. I get a sense.
Go straight ahead. So
I get a sense, Ibrahima, that the junta would like to, you know, as it were, give in to the diplomatic processes, especially also because already you are suffering under the sanctions. So life is not the best for you at this time. So they would rather prefer to sit down and negotiate than wait for any such attack, right?
Yes, this is the fact. Indeed, people are suffering. Even now, we just face lack of energy, and yes, there is sanction, and people maybe start feeling the sanction on their life. But there is, even at this point, to show you how people are really committed, even in sanction, and how people can suffer from this sanction. People are living it like a kind of freedom, like a kind of sacrifice they have to do to have real independence. So I think all the ECOWAS speeches are not helping ECOWAS to really have...
Thank you very much, Ibrahima Boubacar Salo. He is an analyst and media consultant in Niger. And we also spoke to Seydou Abudu, president, Ghanaian community in Niger. He's a Ghanaian, and they are scared that in the case of an attack, they don't know how they are going to get out of that place. Now, let me get to my guests on Zoom, then come to the studio, and I will plead with all of you to try to give your concluding comments in a minute or a minute and 30 seconds. Let me begin with Colonel Festus Abuaji.
Thank you, Samson. First of all, I would wish to suggest strongly that ECOWAS should take into serious consideration very potential risks around the security situation in Niger, to the geopolitical dynamics that could unfold, 3, the humanitarian aspects as a result of the impact of any military operation, and all of that around the fragmentation, potential fragmentation of ECOWAS, undermining the regional integration effort. Now, next, every war, whether it's intervention or whatever, also involves or entails a media campaign. And ECOWAS, I posted on my Facebook, is not winning the media campaign war. So ECOWAS needs to feed its audiences with the requisite information. A lot of the things that Dr. Abdul Fattah Musa has said should have been available to all of us, so
All
we can
right.
have a constructive debate.
Okay.
And then finally, if you may permit me, my view still stands that ECOWAS's strategy of the military intervention lacks international political support.
All right.
That is a critical factor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dr. Kwesi Enin, you are still where you are. This will not happen. Diplomacy, it's the only way out. Even if it doesn't work, then what? Nothing happens?
There will be no intervention. And I think from what we are all saying, diplomacy has been given a chance. ECOWAS needs this space to regain its credibility. What we will be seeing is a negotiation process in which we will find or come to a win-win situation where there will be a transition plan. Because the mere or the sheer geopolitical ramifications of a military intervention means that the unintended impact will be much more negative, not only on Niger, but on the wider sub-region. And I'm happy that ECOWAS and the regime in Niger are using the mediation option now. And that convinces me that the military option is on the back burner. ECOWAS needs to go into any mediation or negotiation.
All right.
A position of strength.
All right. Thank you so very much, Professor Kwesi Enin. Kojo Nkrumah, what will be your final words? Of course, I appreciate that.
Something very quickly.
You want all of us to project the primacy of diplomacy.
Yeah, I think the submissions of Ibrahima Boubacar are a good feedback point to ECOWAS. The point is that in the minds of Nigerians, in the minds of people of the West Africa, it appears as though all ECOWAS is saying is that we are going to war. And I think that is good feedback that ECOWAS needs to drum home the two options that it is embarking upon, which is the diplomatic option first, but with the gun on the table as a clear and well-articulated option. Number two, I think that we in civil society and media also have a responsibility not to frame the conversation in a way that elicits a particular kind of response from citizens, but to frame the conversation in a way that, because for example, in some of the questions that you're asking them, what do you think of what ECOWAS wants to do? It must be understood that what ECOWAS wants to do is to use diplomacy with the option of force as a last resort.
Yes.
If that embodiment is not totally understood, people will just move to one side, that undermines even the diplomatic effort. And then finally, I think that we in politics also have to be careful the kind of precedents that we set. Those of us who are in government don't have to create the impression that, you can do anything without recourse to parliaments. Those of us in opposition do not have to lay down a certain precedent of prior parliamentary approval, because you will be in power someday and you need to take some quick decisions. And finally, citizens, especially those of us who are educated, have a responsibility to do some research ourselves, not just some video that was forwarded to me, so I base my views on that. That way, we can also better educate.
All right, thank you very much, Kojo Nkrumah. And to you, Samuel Okudzeto-Ablaka.
Well, it's important for ECOWAS to go back to the causative factors. I insist that the credibility ECOWAS is suffering and the new wave of coups is because of bad leadership. Earlier, my brother Kojo tried to do a dichotomy between security issues and leadership. You can't create any dichotomy, any difference. It is political leadership that leads to whether the people are protected, if security improves or not. Presidents are commanders-in-chief of the armed forces. They are responsible for the protection of their people. So in the case of Burkina Faso, for example, we all knew that President Marc Kabore could not handle the security situation. The massacre of Solhal, that led to 132 people being killed. That was the beginning of his downfall. So presidents should learn Every aspect. Look, even with this global economic crisis, you cite the West, see how they are offering some buffer. They've managed their economies well. In Africa, the people are exposed. So lessons must be learned. And then finally, meeting the committees of parliament is not a parliamentary session where there's a motion, the plenary has met, the speaker is presiding, and you are doing things democratically, constitutionally.
Right.
So I disagree with Kojo on that aspect. And let me remind all of us that in that region, what we have not discussed today is that external military intervention by NATO, led by Sarkozy, which killed Gaddafi, is what created all this insecurity.
Thank you very much.
So let's learn lessons and avoid a military option. It should be taken.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Emboldening the people.
Dr. Kenahosu, what can you say as your concluding remarks in 30 seconds? I'm very sorry.
I'm very sorry. In the first place, my audio dropped and I couldn't make my submission.
You did. You did make some substantial submissions.
But I want to make the point that it is not only Niger military that is in the limelight, but the whole of French colonialism. And I want to side with Professor Nin that there will not be any intervention. If there is ever military intervention in Niger, ECOWAS will collapse, and we can never redress the crisis that will come about.
Interesting. Thank you very much. I give you the last word, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa.
No, thank you very much. And I want to actually acknowledge the what will I say, the objective analysis by the panel and the constructive engagement that we've had. I would want to repeat that ECOWAS's credibility is at stake. Just as Professor Enin was saying, the Niger coup is one coup too many. If we allow it to sink roots, there will be many coups in the region in the few months to come. And I want to assure all that we are never going to remove the military option off the table. ECOWAS will never do that. We are giving diplomacy a chance. And if we see that diplomacy is working, the first port of call is to start reducing the impact of the sanctions. That is the first point. There to show the goodwill. But the military option will never be off the table, and that we are determined to do that. So those who say there will never be a military coup, they are emboldening these people. And let me tell you once more, General Tiani is not any anti-French or anti-imperialist. He has served the French all his life. What he did was opportunistic intervention, to remove a certain president who he was supposed to protect.